Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Hope you all had a great weekend. Now forget it because it's Monday. And running in the background of this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles, we are mostly going to be having Plane Mechanic Simulator. Independent title from the developers of Car Mechanic Simulator. In fact, you can get Plane Mechanic and Car Mechanic in a bundle on Steam. Although Plane Mechanic is still in early access, and it is not without the occasional game-breaking bug, but what can we say? Early access. Nevertheless, it's actually quite, well, it's really relaxing to play. I mean, rip-roaring, pulse-pounding action is not something that you're going to find playing Plane Mechanic Simulator. You've got three aircraft that you can work on: a de Havilland Tiger Moth, which is what we see here. There's also a Supermarine Spitfire, and a de Havilland Mosquito. Starts you off with the de Havilland Tiger Moth because it's mechanically relatively simple. Propeller, engine, a couple of cylinder blocks, pistons, magneto, carburetor, exhaust pipe, air intake pipe, oil filter, fuel filter, and that's pretty much it. Pilot notices a fault in the aircraft, submits a report, and it's down to you to diagnose the problem and fix it either by replacing or repairing the damaged parts. And that's about as complicated as it gets. I appreciate this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I was reading some of the Steam reviews on this game, and one of them in particular caught my attention. It had been written by a father who'd bought the game for his autistic son. Now, I appreciate not all autistic children are the same. There's a huge spectrum of autistic symptoms. But this guy's son in particular was obsessive about taking things apart and putting them back together again. And so he got Plane Mechanic Simulator for his kid, and he couldn't get him off the PC. He spends hours upon hours upon hours utterly absorbed in this game. And I thought that was really great. So top tip, if you're a parent out there who has a kid on the autistic spectrum, something like this might be ideal for them. Anyway, enough about Plane Mechanic Simulator. Oh no, wait, there was one other thing. I did mention that there were some potentially game-breaking bugs. I've only encountered one of them, but it's a good one. And it's so incredibly stupid. Anyway, in the de Havilland Tiger Moth, the oil tank can present some problems. Having too much oil in the tank can be just as bad as not having enough oil in the tank. So if the pilot reports an issue that may be related to having too much oil in the tank, and upon inspection you see that the tank has been overfilled, or if the pilot requests that as part of regular maintenance you top off the oil tank and you're dumb enough to overfill it, you're pretty much buggered. Because the oil tank doesn't have something as simple as a plug in the bottom, some kind of drain valve for you to lower the level of the oil. And apparently the Royal Air Force didn't think that issuing their aircraft mechanics with something as simple as a spoon to manually, you get the idea. Yeah, you're done. You can never reduce the level of oil in the tank. Which means, because if you do not correct a problem and you sign the aircraft off as being fit to fly, the next time it goes up, it's going to develop problems as a result of whatever it was that you didn't fix. So, yeah, that's all kinds of fun. It is, however, something I suspect is very, very high on the developers' must fix this soon list. So anyway, Plane Mechanic Simulator. Oh, in the interests of complete transparency, I should point out that I didn't actually buy this game. I did get it for free. I've signed up to a site called Keymailer, and if I like the look of certain games that are coming out, I can request Steam keys for them. And sometimes developers just offer me Steam keys through Keymailer anyway, and that's pretty much exactly what happened here. So I did get this game for free, just so you know. Anyway, moving along swiftly. Speaking of stuff that I got for free, well, I didn't exactly get this for free. What I'm talking about is Scriptum, the bloody 7th. I actually bought the game, but this weekend on Saturday, 2nd of March, they were running a playtest for content creators, because apparently that's what I am, where they were playtesting the all-new armoured-only mode. Now, for those of you who don't know what Scriptum is, it's a sort of squad-based tactical World War II shooter, in a similar vein to something like Heroes and Generals. But the focus of Scriptum is very specific. It's all set during Operation Market Garden, the Allied airborne invasion of Holland during 1944 in World War II. The Allies were very, very surprised, despite the Dutch resistance repeatedly telling them so, that major elements of the 9th SS Panzer Division were resting and refitting right around all the drop zones. So it didn't quite go according to plan. But that's basically what Scriptum is set in and around. Now, they have had armoured vehicles in Scriptum before this weekend, but they've never had an armoured vehicle-only game mode. And that's what they were testing on Saturday. And holy shit, it was fun. Now, I've played Scriptum before as an infantryman, and it is very, very good, but I was just so incredibly bad at it. Most of my experience of playing Scriptum was sort of wandering around the fields and hedgerows of Holland, desperately trying to find the rest of my infantry section, having no idea how to communicate with them, and then getting shot by the Germans. So I was kind of, how can I put this? You know, there was a certain element of trepidation prior to my firing up the game and having to go with this armoured vehicle only playtest. But I really shouldn't have worried, because the one thing that definitely stood out about Scriptum on those few occasions when I played it before this weekend was just how friendly the community are. Also, the game really does have, you know, once you figure out how to use it by just looking at the options screen, the game does have fantastic voice over IP communication. You can talk to anybody who is around you. You can talk to anybody who's in your section. And if you're a section leader, your section also has a sort of, well, in fact, it's exactly a battlefield-wide command communications net as well for talking to all of the other section leaders, and so that the overall guy in charge can issue instructions to the various different sections under his command. And the other thing, of course, is that when you're all in a tank, it's very difficult to lose the other members of your section, because hopefully they're all inside the tank with you. They don't have to be, of course. In fact, you'll often see the tank commander, like, driver, halt, park up here in these trees, I'm just going to go out and have a look around. And take the binoculars out, scoot forward into some hedges, and then just look for some German tanks. Or, you know, if you're playing 9th SS Panzer Division, look for some Allied tanks. Spot a target, and then call in the position to the gunner and direct the fire onto the target. It really is a fantastic game. When I was playing it on Saturday, there were all kinds of famous YouTube and Twitch names present. There was Sheriff Eli, who's got around about, I think, not far short of 250,000 followers on Twitch. He's an American live streamer. And myself and this other random guy that I ended up getting my Churchill shot out from under me with decided, you know, there's another tank over there, a Cromwell. They only have 2 crew in it. Let's actually join that section. And it was Sheriff Eli. Of course, they were on the other side of the battlefield. So myself and my ex-Churchill crewman were jogging across the fields of Holland in order to try to catch up with Sheriff Eli's Cromwell. And of course, because we just joined his section, his tank crew, we could hear his voice communications going on with his driver. Damn, but that guy takes it seriously. Listening to him go, it was actually quite intimidating. I mean, I felt like a real noob by comparison, which is probably quite accurate, but he was all, Alpha Charlie, this is Charlie Foxtrot. Be advised, I have reports of enemy armor in the woods, 200 meters south-southeast relative to your location. My intentions are to flank around 300 yards to the west of objective Foxtrot, get into those woods and see if I can't smoke him out some. I was thinking to myself, I want to be in his tank. Can I be in your tank, Eli? Anyway, the next battle that we played, I ended up in a Sherman under the command of Digby Tatum Warner, who some of you may know because he's often part of the gang in Soviet Womble, 1.3 million subscribers on YouTube and counting, Soviet Womble's bullshittery videos where he and other members of the ZF clan basically arse around in various different games, having a laugh and making utter tits out of themselves. And Digby Tatum Warner was a really good tank commander as well, although in a very British kind of way, which you'll all see tomorrow, because tomorrow's video is going to be the post-scriptum armoured test. I had a lot of fun, much more so than I thought I was going to have, because like I said, I've played post-scriptum before, and my experience of playing post-scriptum prior to this weekend was just kind of wandering around lost in the fields and villages of Holland, and then getting shot by the Germans. So I had a completely different experience this weekend. And I hope you lot are going to enjoy the video, because that's what we're going to be watching tomorrow. Anyway, this weekend's casual Saturday video was Armoured Battlecrew World War I. And again, it's the kind of game that is probably not going to be to everybody's tastes, but I was quite pleasantly surprised to see how many people actually like the look of it, and were looking forward to having a go when the game actually comes out. This is not the first time that I had received review code, or to be more accurate, preview code for Armoured Battlecrew. I first had the opportunity to take a look at the game around about 6 months ago, when the developers first contacted me and asked me if I was interested in doing a video on the game. And it's kind of tricky, because you're lucky enough to get this very, very early look at a game when it's still in alpha. It's not even in early access. And you kind of like it. You can see the potential in what they have, even at that kind of early stage. Even though it really looks kind of bad, there are textures missing. The game keeps crashing for whatever reason. There are bugs that make it difficult to progress. You can understand this because you're looking at something that in many cases is often pre-alpha. But from my perspective, I find that if a game, even though I'm looking at it and thinking, this is going to be good with more development, I can see what they're trying to do here, I like it, and with a lot more polish and a bit more content, this could be a very, very good game. But if I was to push a video out on it today, based on the current state of the game, I can't help but feel that the video would hurt the developers more than it would help them. Which is kind of frustrating, because, you know, I want to try to help independent developers, providing they're at least developing good games. And I can see that they are, in many cases, developing what looks like it is at some point going to be a good game. And it's at this early stage of development where the developers really tend to need all of the help that they can get. But if I was to push out a video on a game that keeps crashing, that looks like a dog's dinner because the textures are missing, you see where I'm going with this? I really don't think I'd be helping them. And that was more or less the situation I was in with Armoured Battlecrew 6 months ago. So when they came back to me 6 months later and said, do you want to take another look at the game? And I took another look at the game, and it's still not there, but it's far better looking, far smoother, far more polished. Very, very happy to do a video. And was also very happy to see the generally positive response that most people had towards Casual Saturday's Armoured Battlecrew video. Generally positive. There were still a couple of sticking points, and it was mostly down to the social justice warriors. All the far-right extremists who do battle with social justice warriors on the internet every day. What you're talking about here, Jingles, couple of things. Just for a couple of seconds in the video, I took you to the barracks where you could see the various different crew that you could have in your tanks. One of them was Indian, and one of them was a woman. Wow, that really seemed to trigger people. All of the neocons immediately started giving shit to the game developers for putting people into the game that would never have served in tanks during World War I, despite the fact that 1 million members of the Indian Army did, in fact, okay, they didn't fight in tanks, but there were various different cavalry and infantry divisions which served as part of the British Imperial Forces during World War I. And the fact that there was a female crew member really seemed to upset a lot of people as well. I mean, yes, we all know that during the First World War, women only served in either nursing or auxiliary roles. We all know this. What exactly do you think Armoured Battlecrew is? It's not a history documentary. It's a game. Yes, Jingles, said all the neocons, we know this, but the fact that the developers are pandering to the social justice warriors because they're afraid that if they don't put members of ethnic minorities, who are in fact only minorities outside of India, but never mind that, and various different gender groups into the game, they're afraid that the social justice warriors will come down on them like a ton of bricks. And you know what? You're right. Game developers these days are fucked if they do, and they're fucked if they don't. If you make your game historically authentic by not including the option to crew your various different vehicles with members of ethnic minorities, even though they may have in fact served, and with genders other than male, then the social justice warriors are going to be horribly offended and demand that everybody boycott your game because you're all clearly racist and genderist and, what have you. On the other hand, if you do opt for a bit of inclusion, the neoconservatives are going to be all over you for bowing to pressure from social justice warriors. The developers literally cannot win. And I realise, of course, that the overwhelming majority just want to play the game because it looks cool. We're really only talking here about a very, very small percentage of the potential audience. What's depressing is that they're always the loudest section of the audience, and they always take up more than their fair share of commentary. I really do feel sorry for game developers, because, like I said, they're fucked if they do, and they're fucked if they don't. At the end of the day, all they want to do is make a game. They're not trying to make a history documentary here. I mean, I love it when a game's set within a certain historical time frame, and the developers go out of their way to try to at least make everything as historically authentic as they possibly can. A particularly good example is Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is set in Bohemia, the modern-day Czech Republic, in I think the 13th or 14th century. And for the most part, they absolutely nail the historical setting. Although Kingdom Come Deliverance is maybe too good of an example, because one of the driving forces behind the development of that game was to get it as historically authentic as they possibly could. But I definitely appreciate the effort. I mean, I didn't expect it, but I appreciate it when it's done, and when it's done well. At the same time, if a game happens to be set during a certain historical period, and they don't get it 100% historically authentic, I don't really care, because I'm not watching a documentary here. I don't play computer games to learn my history. I read books to learn my history because books are written by historians. Computer games mostly aren't. I play games to be entertained. If I can be informed and educated while playing those games, great. But any historical information that I gain from playing a game, while I appreciate it, is strictly within the realm of bonus points. And one thing I am not going to do is start basing my knowledge of history from what I learned from playing a computer game. If I do learn something from playing the computer game, I'm going to research it and confirm it elsewhere. I'm certainly not going to start getting into online arguments with tank historians about whether or not the Su-100M1 was a credible counter to the Tiger tank in World War II. Because despite the fact that both machines exist in World of Tanks, only one of them actually existed in reality. And it wasn't the Su-100M1. Wait, are you saying World of Tanks isn't historically accurate? Of course it isn't. It's an arcade game. It's never supposed to be historically accurate. If you want historical accuracy and you can't be asked to open a book, go and look at military history visualised on YouTube or something. Because you're not going to find it in World of Tanks. You're certainly not going to find it in Armoured Battlecrew either, so please, stop looking. As far as I'm concerned, games like this have only one historical duty. Stimulate an interest in history, in the subject matter of the game, amongst the players. Anything that they do above and beyond that, any historical authenticity or accuracy above and beyond just making you interested in history, is bonus points. All they have to do is stimulate the interest. If they manage to do that, if people play these games, if they play Post-Scriptum, World of Tanks, Armoured Battlecrew, World of Warships, War Thunder, whatever, and they think, this shit's really fascinating, I must learn more. If they manage to do that, as far as the history part is concerned, they've done their job. So, once and for all, pretty please, with a fucking cherry on top, can we all stop losing our shit about whether or not a 30 polygon model crew member inside a 50 polygon model World War I tank sits down or stands up when they go to the toilet? Anyway, before we get done for the day, there is one other thing that I wanted to address, and again, it's something that was raised in a comment to one of the videos that I uploaded last week. In this case, it was Far Cry New Dawn. The video concerned itself with the good bits, or at least what I thought were the good bits in Far Cry New Dawn. Specifically, two recurring characters, Sharky Beauchamp and Herc Drubman Jr. I love the voice acting of both of these characters. Herc is just such an idiot, but he's completely blissfully unaware of just how stupid he is. And I love that about him. I really do find it genuinely hilarious. Most people have got some kind of mental checkpoint set up, halfway between their brain and their mouth. And the mental checkpoint's sole duty is to intercept things coming from the brain and just check them for stupidity before they leave the mouth, right? Herc doesn't have any of that. He just says whatever he's thinking, regardless of how dumb or stupid it is. And I think it's hilarious, particularly with the delivery given by the extremely talented voice actor who does his voice. Now, the comment in reference to this Far Cry New Dawn video, and it was actually a very good point, was, I didn't cut and paste the whole thing, but it basically boiled down to this. Jingles, why is it that when Herc says or does something stupid, it's funny, but when the villains say or do exactly the same things, it isn't? And I thought that was a very good question, and hopefully I've got a very good answer for you. You be the judge. You see, the difference here, it's one of context. Herc Drubman Jr. and Sharky Beauchamp are comedy sidekicks. He's Bluto Blutarsky from Animal House. He's Dwight Schrute from The Office. It's not his job to win the day and get the girl. It's his job to be an idiot and not have the slightest idea of just how funny he actually is. Being funny is what they're supposed to do, and if they make you laugh, they've done their job. Now, I appreciate that Herc's particular brand of idiocy and fart and knob jokes are probably not going to be to everybody's tastes, but I find them funny, so as far as I'm concerned at least, the developers have done their job with that character. Now we move on to the villains of the piece, and I'll be going into this in more detail in my upcoming Far Cry New Dawn video, The Bad Bits, because the developers have utterly failed with the villains of Far Cry New Dawn. Because you're not supposed to laugh at them. They're not supposed to do dumb shit while they're trying to be menacing and scary. Imagine if you were watching the opening episode of the 7th season of The Walking Dead, when Jeffrey Dean Morgan's Negan character... Okay, yeah, I know he made his first appearance in the final episode of the previous season, but you get the idea. Imagine if he'd stepped out of the motorhome, slipped on a banana peel, landed on his arse and shit himself. His character probably wouldn't have been quite as scary. Imagine if you were watching Star Wars, and right at the beginning when Darth Vader steps on board the Rebel blockade runner, imagine if the first thing he said was, "I'll give it a minute or two before you go in there. I had a really bad curry last night." It kind of robs the villain of any kind of sense of menace, really, doesn't it? I mean, it works when it's a comedy sidekick. It doesn't work so much when it's the villain of the piece, unless you're watching Spaceballs and the villain of the piece is Dark Helmet. That's not to say that it can't work if you're actually trying to have a scary villain. I mean, again, going back to The Walking Dead, Jeffrey Dean Morgan's Negan is a particularly good example, because he is genuinely witty, charismatic, charming, and sometimes very funny. But he never lets you forget exactly what the character's capable of. Even when he's being his most charismatic and witty, you can't help but find yourself waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just waiting to see when the mask is going to slip and you're going to see the monster. You never get that with the villains in Far Cry New Dawn. There's never any real sense of menace. You're just waiting to see how they're going to fuck things up next and what dumb shit they're going to say. And that's the difference. It can be a subtle one. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, in The Walking Dead for example, pulls it off exceptionally well. It's usually not quite that subtle. Darth Vader, perfect example. But the only time you can really get away with having a villain that constantly says and does the most stupid stuff is if you're watching a Mel Brooks comedy and it's called Spaceballs. If you're still doing it and expecting your villain to be scary, you really need to go back to writing school. And that's where Far Cry New Dawn fails. Well, it's one of the places where Far Cry New Dawn fails. There are many others, but as far as the villains are concerned, that's pretty much it. Well, that's bringing us to the end of this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles, but there is one other thing that I wanted to do before we go, and I've actually remembered to do this 2 weeks in a row now. Wow, check me out. Yes, it is the return of On This Day in History. Except today, I'm not going to do today, the 4th of March. I am instead going to do Sunday, the 10th of March, because that's my birthday. I will be 49 years old. On the 10th of March in the year 1803, the US government handed over the princely sum of 50 million francs to France and bought themselves the state of Louisiana. This was known as the Louisiana Purchase. It didn't go unnoticed by America's next door neighbour, Spain, however. What are you talking about, Jingles? Spain's in Europe, isn't it? Yes, it is. But right next door to Louisiana is the state of Florida, which was owned by Spain at the time, and the US government wasted no time redrafting the map of Louisiana to include huge portions of western Florida, something that really upset the Spanish, not least of which because they'd managed to get the French to promise them that they wouldn't sell Louisiana to a third party. France, however, really kind of needed the money. It wasn't just the 15 million francs that were paid up front, they also had numerous debts cancelled to the tune of around about $600 billion in today's money. So it was not an insubstantial sum. And due to the fact that at the time they were at war with pretty much everybody in Europe, they really needed the cash. They weren't at war with everybody in Europe, however. They did have one ally. Can you guess who it was? Yes, it was Spain. You can imagine how impressed the Spanish were. Well, I suppose the lesson here, kids, is never ally with the French when they're short of money. Also, on March the 10th in the year 1915 was the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle, the first large-scale operation by the British Army in the First World War. About halfway through the battle, the British artillery pretty much ran out of ammunition, which made life very interesting for the British infantry divisions at the front. By the battle's conclusion, the British Army had managed to recapture an area of ground roughly equivalent to the sand trap at the number 9 hole on the golf course at St Andrews, and it had only cost them 7,000 British troops, 4,200 Indian troops, and anything between 8,500 to 10,000 German troops. The battle had absolutely no strategic significance, but it did at least show that the British Army were capable of mounting a large-scale attack after several months of static winter trench warfare. And it did also improve relations with the French High Command, who up until that point didn't really think that the British had the stomach for a long fight, and were delighted to see that the British High Command were just as willing to accept ridiculous losses for no gains as the French were. Also on the 10th of March in 1945, the US Army Air Force, perhaps thinking anything the British can do in Dresden, we can do better, firebombed Tokyo. The resulting firestorm resulted in 100,000 deaths, some of whom may even have been military. Also on the 10th of March, but in 1969, James Earl Ray confessed to the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He later recanted his confession, saying that he did not personally shoot Dr. King, but may have been partially responsible without knowing it. Despite the fact that shortly after the fatal shot had been fired, witnesses saw him fleeing from a rooming house across the street from the motel where Dr. King was assassinated, in which he had been renting a room in his own name, and nearby which a package was found that included a rifle and binoculars, both belonging to him and both having his fingerprints on them. Unsurprisingly, he was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison. During his prison sentence, he managed to convince Playboy magazine to interview him and conduct a polygraph test in order to establish his innocence. To nobody's great surprise, the polygraph test not only confirmed that he did it, but it also determined that he did it alone. Despite the evidence against him, James Earl Ray continued to protest his innocence until his death in prison in 1998 as a result of complications from liver and kidney failure as a result of suffering from hepatitis C. By a remarkable coincidence, March the 10th, the date where he initially made his first confession to the assassination, was also his birthday. And along with me, he's not the only person who was born on the 10th of March. I mean, well, obviously, millions of people were born on the 10th of March, but he's not the only famous person. Not that I'm famous. Oh, you know what I mean. A few other people that you may have heard of were also born on March the 10th. 1415, Vasily II, Grand Prince of Moscow. 1503, Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. 1846, Edward Baker Lincoln, the son of Abraham Lincoln. 1900, Violet Brown. Probably never heard of her, although you may have if you're from Jamaica, as she's the oldest Jamaican who ever lived. She died in the year 2017 at the ripe old age of 117. In 1918, Günter Rahl, German fighter ace and later Luftwaffe general, the third most successful fighter pilot in military aviation history, credited with 275 kills, almost all of them in Messerschmitt 109, and all but 3 of them against the Russians on the Eastern Front. Continuing the World War II connection, on the 10th of March 1940, somebody that pretty much all of you have probably heard of was also born. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, March the 10th is also the birthday of Chuck Norris. But between the two of us, we all know who's the real badass. Yeah, it's him. And we're almost done, but not quite, because on the 10th of March 1957, in Riyadh in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the wife of a Saudi businessman by the name of Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden gave birth to a bouncing baby boy whom they decided to call Osama. And young Osama grew up to be very upset with the United States of America, although not quite as upset as the United States of America was going to be with him. And on that note, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. Hope you all enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.